see how to talk about Indian culture, because it is not one culture, it's many cultures. It's a very large landmass, more a country because of several historical, incidents. And now it's actually not one country, it's many countries that, in the past used to be called India. And also just the rich diversity of it have a very distinct culture. So maybe the real conversation is to talk about how these cultures live with each other, often well, often struggling as well, that complexity. So instead of trying to decide what one aspect of Indian culture I would speak, I thought it might be useful to really highlight the diversity of these cultures, so that in your own connections with people of Indian descent in the Indian diaspora here, you have a rich understanding of, both what they, what part of Indian culture they bring with them, and also the parts that they don't. And it could be religious diversity, it could be linguistic diversity. Many of you on the call know Indian cultures extremely well. Many have lived there. Some of you are sort of ambassadors of that culture, having learned and performed arts from that part of the world, writing as diaspora people. So there's a rich, interesting group. So what I'm going to do, I thought, is to take 9 places of worship. And I've selected all of these as buildings and places of worship that I have personally visited. And then to tell the story of this, subcontinent and this culture through those places. So those places will really be a little bit of a symbol. They're not all encompassing. And this is not a history lecture. This is just stories. And there's more importance in the culture than in the historic details. But I'm also happy to answer any questions to the best of my ability about, very specific details. If I know, if not, I can refer you to them as well. So just give me a minute to do a screen share, and we'll get started right away. There's one person who had their hand up, and I hope that might have been a mistake. If anyone does have a question, please do put them on the, put them on the chat. I'm seeing some good questions already. Pong, I noticed your question, so I'll talk about it. It's actually, there is a slide, interestingly, dedicated just to that question. Okay, I hope everyone can see the slides. Do know that when I'm screen sharing, I will not be able to see the chat. Many of you who present on Zoom know that we have this issue. I can't see chat, but either Armin, Payam, or one of the other hosts will look at chat and read out a question if it needs interruption, particularly if something wasn't clear and you want me to repeat it then and there. It might be good to interrupt, but otherwise, questions at the end. So this is the title of the talk, Home to Old and New World Religions. As Armin said in the introduction, the oldest, one of the oldest world religions that we know of, Hinduism, traces its history back to just the dawn of humanity itself, was born in India, and India also has the largest followers of the newest of the great world religions, the Baha'i faith. So this is sort of, the story is bookended between these two, these two stories. Also, as talk about culture, I had originally found an alternate title to this, India Beyond Holy Cows, Charm Snakes, and Butter Chicken. I think things that come to mind when people think of India are, its diversity. It's also baffling. It looks very foreign in many ways. But I think for people who have lived there, there's also a deep familiarity of things that are similar, that just look clothed in, a lot of color and different aromas. But it's still very much a pulsating, society that is grappling with old and new, just like all of us are, with its own set of unique problems and idiosyncrasies. I thought I would take architecture because it is one way. I could have also done this through a different form of art, because Indian art is so ancient and so diverse. This particular slide is from a public relations campaign by the tourism ministry many years ago called Incredible India. And they did a very nice job of a range of advertisements. And I thought this was pretty, some of you will recognize the Taj Mahal right in the center. Many will recognize the Baha'i House of Worship, the Lotus Temple, to its right on the screen. On either corner are elements of British and Indian architecture when they were mixed. One is the Gateway of India in Bombay, another is a Gateway of India in Delhi, and then you see Mughal architecture, then a big statue of the Buddha, and a Hindu temple, right behind the Baha'i. The Baha'i temple. So I thought this would be a good motif to take in the talk. And I also just wanted, you can't really talk about India, Indian culture, Indian immigrants, without talking about our newly elected Madam Vice President, who is the first woman, the first Black person, and also the first South Asian to hold that office, and really represents, for many people of South Asian descent, particularly of Indian descent, a true immigrant story. A mother from India, a father from Jamaica, they meet and marry, and I should say a woman from India, a man from Jamaica, they meet and marry, they raise a family, and their daughter is now in one of the highest offices of this country. Many countries of the world, it is impossible for minorities to reach this level of elected power due to systemic, injustices. So this was a particularly interesting moment to have this talk. We had planned this talk well before, the elections or election results, but it turned out well. I'm going to actually play a small video relating to this inauguration and how the South Asian immigrant community did something very special to celebrate. So tell me if you can hear and see.
A few months ago, I was introduced to a kolam, which is a South Indian geometric pattern of dots and lines. Connected that to Kamala Harris's heritage and learned about its energy and the energetic welcome that it provides. We recognize that this would be a really great opportunity for a lot of people in America to participate in a cultural offering. Each of the dots in a kolam represents obstacles, and the lines around it are the way we flow. So we asked people to make a tile at home using paper and recycled campaign signs, or just simply cardboard, and put a little bit of themselves into coloring around the dots. We've had an incredible response in terms of participation, from the DC public schools, to yoga groups, to 5-year-old Savita, all the way to 95-year-old Rukmani Auntie. It's been an extraordinary community experience and a collective offering. Inauguration Kolam 2021 is a way for us to provide a different kind of energy for a new administration.
Kolam is a traditional art form from Tamil Nadu in South India. Women draw them on the floor outside their houses using powdered rice or rock. These geometric patterns, consisting of dots and lines, are a symbol of welcome and also a reminder to enter the house with positive energy. Kolams are ephemeral, as they are walked over and wiped away, making way for a new kolam the next day. Personally, I find drawing kolams very meditative. They have been my constant guide, helping me find solutions to many of life's challenges. Here is a quick lesson on kolams. We will start with the basics and work our way up in complexity. Kolams can be visual expressions of many life lessons. One such idea is that the dots represent obstacles in life, and weaving around them while maintaining a symmetry teaches you how to deal with real-life challenges. To give you an idea of the scale of the kolam installation, you can compare the 7-dot kolam to the 47-dot kolam, extending to about 60 feet in length.
A 47-dot kolam means 1,149 tiles. That's thousands of stories that we're going to weave together into a quilt-like ground cover somewhere in DC. Folks from around the world have been asking how they can be a part of this. So we're also doing a digital photo mosaic kolam. All you have to do to be a part is submit your picture with a kolam at 2021kolam.com.
We get a lot of unbelievably beautiful tiles, but the heart of this project is about the spirit and the stories of the people who participated. We had stories of joy and learning, kids finding ways to reinvent the kolam in art class, or tying in history lessons about the Underground Railroad in their tile designs. We heard stories of healing. A woman lost her father to COVID a few weeks before she sat down to design her tiles. And she put all of that love and that grief and those memories of her father into her designs, and she found it therapeutic. Now, this woman was a stranger to me, but after we talked and I hung up, I just wept, both at her loss, but also at the beauty of this moment of connection. We hope it's clear that this project isn't about politics or about a political victory. It transcends that. I'm a Tamil mother raising two bicultural daughters in the US, and it's hard at times. But to realize that there's going to be a woman called Kamala Devi in the White House, and that there's a giant collaborative kolam that thousands of people were a part of, is so moving. You know, it resonates not just because part of my cultural story is being represented, but it's also about opening the door to have more and more stories heard. And for many of us, that is one of the most beautiful parts of the promise of America.
I hope that was a beautiful video. I thought it really captured, the essence and the spirit of this time, and an immigrant experience of being able to bring your culture with you, and for it to be accepted, and for it to not only just be accepted, but really celebrated. It's a special moment during this inauguration. All right, so I'll go back to the history, and we'll pick it up from where we left. Very quickly, in terms of religious diversity, the 2011 census in India shows that close to 80% of India's population are Hindus, and about 14% are Muslims. With a population of 1.2 billion, that is a very large number of the second most populous religion, Islam, and it is one of the largest Muslim populations in the world. It's likely number 3. I think Indonesia and Pakistan have more Muslims than India. It's probably number 3. So it's a very large number of Muslims, and about 2% Sikhs, and 2.3% Christians, and a small number of Buddhists, Jains. These so and so percentage multiplied by a billion are actually reasonable numbers as well. So this is the general, religious landscape of India. And I want to begin our story with this first picture, which really is actually not even in India. It's now in modern day Pakistan. It's a place called Mohenjo-daro, and it is part of the Indus Valley civilization. This picture is particularly important because what you see was all underground. The only thing that was seen when they first found the site was that top, what looks like a dome, and it was a Buddhist temple. Buddhism originated in India and traversed, to the east and to the west. We know very well the travel of Buddhism to the west of India, but to the east of India, but it also spread all the way into Afghanistan, met and mingled with Greek culture, and with thriving Buddhist religion in modern day Pakistan and Afghanistan. So when the early archaeologists saw that top site, they started digging beneath, and what they found was a Bronze Age civilization, 2500 BC. It flourished around 2500 BC to 1900 BC. It was called the Indus Valley civilization. This particular city is in modern day Pakistan. Before India and Pakistan were partitioned, they were part of British India, and this now fell in Pakistan. When I lived in Pakistan, I made almost, I thought of it as a pilgrimage to go and see the oldest, South Asian historic site that we have. It's a city called Mohenjo-daro. About 30,000 to 60,000 people lived there, making it one of the largest ancient cities. Very often 10,000 people living in one of our ancient cities was considered large. This was very, very old. And that whole Indus Valley civilization had somewhere between 1 to 5 million people in the 26th century BC. So it's a very large civilization. I was looking at the US Census Bureau that also has population of the world, going backward through various methods of projection. Around that time, roughly in the world, there might have been around 20 to 25 million people. And 1 to 5 million of them lived in this civilization. That's how important it was in terms of number. So the interesting story around this civilization is that, they had seals, they traded with Mesopotamia, they made pottery, they made sculpture and architecture. There's the picture of this, what's called the dancing woman, a woman standing with great confidence, but in a posture as though she is dancing, a priest-like man with a beautifully embroidered shawl on this picture, pottery. It's a very advanced civilization. And going back to the old picture, you can see a whole city laid out with bricks. These are bricks that were from that time that are perfectly preserved because they were all underground for, at this stage, millennia. So the Indus Valley civilization is where Hinduism was born. What we call Hinduism today, one of the seals here on the left-hand side top, it refers to, looks like a person sitting in a yoga posture, surrounded by animals. It's called the seal of Pashupati, often referred to, sort of being an older version of the god Shiva. You also see something that looks like a unicorn and an elephant, animals that were part of that culture. So what is really interesting is this culture was thriving at that time. And then, there is a theory that it met or collided with people coming from Central Asia. They were called Aryans or Aryans, as we call them. The Aryan means the word in Sanskrit means a noble person. And Aryans had two things that had an advantage: horses and chariots. And they came and met with this group of people. In the past, it was called an Aryan invasion. It's more now called Aryan migration because these cultures naturally collided, but also intermarried and exchanged, their religious and traditional beliefs. The Aryans were nomadic people. The people in the Indus Valley civilization were farmers, so agriculturalists. So these two cultures met, and they, created, and the emergence of Hinduism as we know it today happened there. The Aryans brought with them a language called Sanskrit, or an early version of the Sanskrit language. The Dravidians, or the people of the Indus Valley civilization are called, spoke their own language. So these two languages also mixed. There are languages now in India. The further you go south in India, the more the language is tied to the Dravidian languages of the Indus Valley civilization. And the further north in India, we have languages that are close to the Aryan languages, based on Sanskrit. So this Aryan Dravidian mix was really sort of the birth of Hinduism as we know it today. And also later on, as this Hinduism took root and spread, it created this culture, this structure of castes. And these castes were supposed to have come out of a division of labor in that society. The priests were in the highest class, the laborers were in the lowest caste, and in between were the warriors and the tradesmen and women, the traders. But soon the caste system degenerated into highly ossified social strata with a hierarchy, and also placed a value on what type of work was more valuable than not. And this caste system became something that became very, very oppressive, and has to date has both in its place of its birth in India, but also in the diaspora, plays a very big role in society, and in India, certainly in its politics as well. So as a rejection of this ossified caste system, came many movements, and two religions sprung up at the time. Somewhere around in the 7th century, 600 BC, both both Buddhism and Jainism. So Buddhism, are represented by that pagoda that was found in Mohenjo-daro. We will talk about Jainism a little bit later. The second picture is really now to focus on Hinduism itself, which then, continued to be the dominant religion in the Indian subcontinent, and to date is the majority religion, as we saw, 80% of of India. Very often, Hinduism and aspects of Hindu culture are often talked about as Indian culture. And the point I wanted to make with this talk is that it is one aspect of Indian culture, but equally valid and equally diverse are all the other religious traditions that exist in India that also contribute to, what is India and what is Indian culture. This temple was comes much later in history, in about 11th century in the southern part of India. And this is to Pong's question, this is really important. This is the part of India from which craftsmen and traders and poets and architects went all over Southeast Asia, taking Buddhism and Hinduism to Cambodia, to Thailand, to modern-day Laos and Vietnam, that whole region, and to Indonesia as well. Many Hindu kingdoms were founded. These were not, invasions or colonization per se. These were mostly cultural ambassadors who went to those areas, and kings in those areas accepted these religions and cultures. And to date, we have names of people, and particularly Indonesia, Thailand, Cambodia. Many people have names that are Sanskrit names that evoke Hindu stories or Hindu deities. Many of the famous Thai kings call themselves Rama, the 4th, 5th, and or the dynasty of Ramas based on a Hindu mythological king. So the influence of Hinduism is very, very deep, not only in the Indian subcontinent, but even historically in Southeast Asia. And Hinduism also, through its diaspora during the colonial period, has spread all over the world, and large Hindu populations even outside of Asia, for example, in Suriname, Guyana, in the Americas, but also in Fiji, in the Pacific. There are very large Hindu communities where these cultures have gone. And something that is really, at the core of Hinduism is this idea that God is one and can be worshipped by many names. And in its, sort of, I feel like highest and most tolerant form, Hinduism accepts and welcomes the diversity and plurality of religions. And this is something that we will see in the stories that come afterwards, how Jews and how Zoroastrians and Christians came to India and made it their home for a very long time. So this picture tells the story of Hinduism that spread all over India. And it's in immense diversity. So that could be a whole talk in and of itself, which I will not give today. But I will move to this next one, which is a Jain temple. So Buddhism and Jainism both came across as a way to reject this ossified, caste structure and, this class hierarchy, and really got to the, a very noble and pure and core component of spirituality, which is leading a good life. Buddhists and Jains often do not talk about God in their religion. They very often say they are atheists, which is really a little bit of a stretch. It's not atheist, but they do not have the same kind of God concept, definitely not of Judeo-Christian traditions, and also not about Hindu traditions. One way of thinking about it is the idea of God was so common in that subcontinent that Buddha, or the founder of the Jain faith, Mahavira, and they were contemporaries. We don't know if they met each other or had any contact with each other, but their messages are very, very similar. When they in their sort of original form. The Buddha says that he was the most recent of a series of bodhisattvas, who are enlightened beings, who are human just like us, but who have transcended this physical plane and attained nirvana. Mahavira, the founder of the Jain religion, also says exactly the same thing, that he is the last of a series of, they call them Tirthankaras, Bodhisattvas for the Buddhists and Tirthankaras for Jains. And both of those religions, Buddhism is much more, global. Jainism is far more located to the northwest part of India, some other parts of India. With the diaspora has spread outside of India as well. There's a beautiful Hindu Jain temple here in the DC metro area, but there's also Jain temples all over many places of the United States. Known for marble temples, intricate carvings, beautiful architecture. The Jains are also very known for their principle of ahimsa, or non-violence. They truly believe that in order to progress spiritually, we have to be non-violent, not only towards each other, but also what we eat. So they are vegetarian in their dietary, prescription, in their dietary preference, and some of their, religious teachers often will wear a covering in their mouth so that they don't unintentionally take, microorganisms. A certain amount will obviously go through any, as we are learning now with the COVID virus. But they don't even want to take in an insect or a small being by mistake. So they have their mouth covered always with a sheet. The original, COVID masks. Do Jain, priests Google, and you will see these pictures. So Buddhism, Jainism, Hinduism are the three, ancient Indian religions. They are all based on the Sanskrit language or derivatives of that language. They will all talk about dharma, righteousness, goodness, karma, the law of, what you do. You reap the good and bad of your actions. They will all talk about transcending moksha. Many believe in, they all have different versions, but believe in reincarnation of one sort or the other, that you come back many, many times to this earth. And when you accumulate sufficient good, you transcend and you stop going through this life cycle over and over again. So these are, beautiful old religions in India. Please do keep putting your questions. Know that I can't see them, but just keep putting your questions in there. We'll come back to them. And we can go back to any of these slides with greater questions. Now, this is an interesting, the next slide is quite interesting. I am not going by the history of the time period in which the religions were found. I'm going in order of the times when these religions started interacting with India. Either they were born in India or they came to India. So this is a synagogue in the southern Indian city of Cochin, where it's one of the, there are very few Jews remaining in India at this time, but there were a thriving community of Jewish immigrants who came in two waves. First in 500 BC, they were traders from Judea. And the second came in the 7th century AD, when the second temple of Solomon was destroyed. Sorry, 7th century BC. Yeah. So they came in 500s and 700s. They came to live in India. And then some of these were later on in the 15th, 16th century, Spanish Jews were fleeing the Spanish Catholic, Inquisition and the, religious zealotry there. They also came to India. Now there's less than 500 people of 5,000 people of Jewish origin in India, but some of the synagogues are still there. They are maintained, sometimes maintained and cared for by people of other religions, because the Jewish community, had very strong relationships. One such synagogue, there was a beautiful documentary. The caretaker, the only remaining person who looked after that, is a Muslim. He lives there. And when Jewish tourists or visitors come, he opens up that space for them. Such beautiful stories of coexistence and tolerance that exist. A small side story, actually one more point. There was never any sense of anti-Semitism in India. The Jews lived very well with their neighbors and had a thriving business community in India. So I have, in the research that I did, and when I looked at it from a different version, there was no sort of history of anti-Semitism in India. What there is very interesting, because Hindu and Muslim women were not, lived under a lot of restrictions. Some of the earliest Bollywood movies starred Jewish women, Indian women of Jewish descent. So Nadira, there are several other of these famous actresses who I did not know until 6 months ago. Were actually of Jewish families. They took different names sometimes, or sometimes they didn't. But there was this article was in Israel Post, and the story is when Jews ruled Hollywood, Bollywood. It's a really interesting, story about Jews in India. So many of the Jews went back to Israel. They made Aliyah. They returned, and there are thriving Indian Jewish communities. Many intermarried, but they do live in Israel. And every now and then there are documentaries or stories about Indian foods that are in Israeli cities or shops where there are large Indian populations or other events that happen. So there's an interesting connection there. So the next one I'm going to is yes. The next one is Catholicism, Christianity or Catholicism. This is also an interesting story because, we think of Christianity, coming to India or to many countries through colonization. But Indian Christianity is as old as Christianity itself. One of the apostles of Jesus, Apostle Thomas, went to India to preach the gospel. And, he was, this was 52 AD. So he went to the western coast of Kerala, the Malabar coast, India, the current modern day state of Kerala. And he lived there and he preached and people became Christian. And that community still exists. So it's one of the oldest Christian churches. It's called the Syrian Christian Church or the Mar Thoma Church. And these it's now in about 6 or 7 different subsects, but they have full communion with the church in Rome, and they have their own traditions that go back, beautiful amalgamation of some Indian traditions and Christian traditions. I have a very good friend who is from that community, and I went to her wedding, and it was really interesting. Saw Indian Hindu marriages with many Hindu communities. Women wear a chain around their neck called Mangal Sutra for married women. And this Christian community, 2,000 years old, they had very similar idea, a cross that was made out of 21 beads and a beautiful silk sari. So the person was wearing Western Christian clothes, but during the actual ceremony, they draped a sari around her shoulder during that time. Just a very beautiful amalgamation of this culture. This particular church is not in the western part of India. It's in the eastern part of India, in Chennai, where St. Thomas actually moved and continued to preach and was eventually martyred. And he's buried there, or is claimed that his remains are buried on this spot. And it's called Santom Cathedral. It's called a national shrine in India, and Indian Christians make a pilgrimage to this place. And I was able to go there, and there actually is a spot where they say that this is the spot where, St. Thomas is buried. He's actually the only apostle who's buried outside of a predominantly, the Middle East or Christian nation. So he's buried in India. I've been to this church many times. When I, as a refugee, went from Sri Lanka to India and lived in India, the city that I lived in was Chennai, and this church was not very far by the ocean. This church, of course, what we see now was not from that time. This church was built by Portuguese and then renovated by the British, and it is not a Syrian Christian church. It's actually a Catholic church now, Roman Catholic church, but it's there. It's absolutely majestic. And the Christian community in India during the colonial times is particularly known for hospitals, for schools, and really for sort of popularizing the English language, Western medicine, a lot of that. Of course, also comes the baggage of colonization. They were also very much a part of the various empires that plundered and looted civilizations. But it's a complex history. But people who convert to Christianity in India, tend to be very strong, tend to be, have thriving churches, and there's every denomination, Baptists, the sort of Episcopalians or Anglicans, as they're called, every denomination you see in India, even the most recent, the evangelical churches, the Mormon church. So there's a thriving population of Christians in India with beautiful churches and schools and hospitals associated with Christianity. The next picture I have is Islam. So even though colonizing the British, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the different people who colonized that part of the world, came to India after Islam. Islam itself came to India after Christianity. So Judaism and Christianity came to India before Islam, and that's why it's number 6. Islam is number 6 on my list of religions that I'm covering. And this obviously is extremely complex at this time because there are different stories. The Aryan invasion story is something that the British used very much to establish their own dominance as a group. So they identified with the Aryans who came and conquered India. So the British were, now it's our turn to conquer. So they were, thinking about their role as superior, race. Now you also see with Islam here, the picture that I picked was not the great Taj Mahal or the the big mosques and the architecture that is associated with various kings of the various Mughal dynasties, starting from 672 AD, when the first invaders came, the Muhammad of Ghazni and Muhammad of Ghori, who came to India, and even before them, one of the Umayyad caliphates, tried to conquer India. So I did not take those pictures. I took of a very humble and beautiful shrine of a Sufi saint, Moinuddin Chishti. This is in Ajmer. Terry and I have gone to this many times together when we worked in India. And Moinuddin Chishti came to India from a place in Iran called Sanjar. He was born in a city called Sistan, and he encountered, Sufis. He became a Sufi saint himself and founded the Chistiya order in India. And unlike the kings who came to conquer and had political, dealings, often there were massacres, there were looting, there were burning of temples. Muinuddin Chishti is beloved to date by all Muslims and Hindus alike. And his dargah, or a maqbara where he's buried, that shrine is a place of pilgrimage. For Muslims in South Asia, after Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem, Al-Quds, this is the most sacred spot on earth. They go to pilgrimage, and he is called Garib Nawaz, a giver and caretaker of the poor. And as a Sufi saint, he is well known through music and through art and through through poetry, particularly. His praise is sung to date, and there's always space in Garib Nawaz's home for anyone who comes with any of their desires. He will intercede and fulfill. So the Sufi, it is told that while the kings got the the prominent architecture, a lot of people will know Taj Mahal over this small shrine. It is in fact Sufism and this tolerant, syncretic form of Islam that allowed Islam to spread to the extent that it has in India. There is a story that is reinforced that Islam was spread by the sword. There's some truth to it. These were conquering, armies, and when countries and cultures and armies collide, there are, sort of bad things happen, to put it mildly. But the main reason Islam took root in India is said to have been because of Sufis, and because of their love for music and their ability and their tolerance to different viewpoints and their real all-encompassing love. So that's this picture. This is particularly important because there's tremendous amount of polarization between Hindus and Muslims in India now. It's politicized heavily, and there's a lot of rewriting of the past history of talking about these communities always been at war. Rulers were always at war in many, many kingdoms in India. Hindu rulers also destroyed each other's palaces and temples, and so did Muslim rulers. But politically, it's now very, very popular in movies and writing to cast the entire contact of Hindu and Muslim civilizations of India as being adversarial. And this particular shrine is there in a way to show that that was. So we can come back to this more. The truly Arabs pre-Islam and Indians, as I said, even from the times of Mesopotamia, have been in touch. So this connection of trading has happened because of the monsoon winds. The word monsoon comes from an Indian word mausam, which means season. These monsoon winds blew from the Arabian Sea all the way up to the Himalayas. They hit the Himalayas and they come back. So you have the onward monsoon and the return monsoon, and ships timed their travel to take advantage of the winds to to travel to India. And Arabs brought with them a lot of riches, and took back a lot of spices and riches from India. And many of them brought their religion also with them, and many of them didn't go back. They say that the birds came and the birds left, but the traders came, but some settled. They didn't all go back. There's a beautiful writer in India called Kushwant Singh, and he writes about the history. And one of his stories, he talks about all the birds left, but not all the traders left. Many of them stayed back and married. All right, so just to run through this quickly, this is the Parsi religion, the Zoroastrians, who came to India in the 8th to 10th century. So this is after Islam. They came because they were being persecuted as Iran became a predominantly Muslim country. There was pockets of persecution, so they left and they came and settled in India. It's a beautiful story. They came as peaceful settlers looking for refuge, and the king in the part of Gujarat where they came, saw that these people are coming and asking for refuge, and he's said to have sent them a glass of milk, saying the glass is full, we don't have place for you. And the very, this is of course an urban legend, but it's a story that's told many times. The Parsis, or they call the Zoroastrians, they put sugar in the milk, mixed it very much, and sent it back to him saying, we are going to add beauty and sweetness to your society. We are not a threat. We can blend well. So he's supposed to have, been greatly impressed by that very ingenious response and allowed them to settle. There were two conditions: that they spoke the local language and that they wore local clothes, which Zoroastrians agreed. They mostly speak Gujarati as their Indian language, and they also wear Indian clothes and adopted and blended in many ways. So the Zoroastrian culture is thriving. Of all the pictures that I'm showing today, this is the only one that I've actually not been to. All the other places were places that I have personally been to, so I can share with you memories as well. So this Zoroastrian temple is in Bombay. Another interesting connection between Zoroastrians and India: before this group came, the Aryans that came from the very first slide that we saw, the Aryan migration, they spoke a language of Vedic Sanskrit, which is very similar to the Avestan language, the language of these, the Zoroastrians. So the Zoroastrian holy books are written in a language called Avestan, and they are very similar. Old Persian, Old Avestan is very similar to Sanskrit. Okay, I'm now coming to the last slides. This is the Sikh religion, which came much later in time, around the 15th century. There are about 25 to 30 million Sikhs. You will know them by their turbans. And the Golden Temple is a beautiful, symbol of the religion. It's in the middle of a tank of water, which was founded by a guru. A guru is a term for a learned one or a noble one, a teacher. Guru Nanak. Unlike the founders of Buddhism and Jainism, who were the last in the series of Bodhisattvas and Tirthankaras that we know of, Guru Nanak was the first in the series of 10 Sikh gurus. He founded the religion, and many gurus came after him until the 10th guru was the last of their gurus. And after that, they consider their holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib, their holy book, as their guru. And if you go to a Gurudwara, we have one here in this DC metropolitan area as well, you will see the holy book, a very big copy of the holy book open, and they pay respects to the holy book. They sing praises from the holy book. It's a collection of hymns. So that's the Sikh religion, and it is a religion that is centered around oneness, very egalitarian religion, and more recently, two things. Traditionally, in Sikh temples, there are always food. Anyone who goes, no one goes hungry in the guru's kitchen, as they say. You can go and people are fed anytime, in the temples to date. It's a service, great service. But we also see that be it, during these great world crises, the Sikh community, and particularly during COVID, in many, many Sikh communities, they cook food and take it to places where, people need to be fed or people are in need of nourishment. The Sikhs are very well known for this. So the last one is the Baha'i faith, the most recent of the world religions to come to India. And the Baha'i faith came to India, in fact, the first Baha'i, so the founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, had a predecessor whose name was the Bab. And the Bab was literally, his name means the gate, and he was the precursor to Baha'u'llah, a little bit like John the Baptist and Jesus Christ. The Bab, even though the Bab founded his own religion called the Babi faith, which then became the Baha'i faith as Babis accepted Baha'u'llah afterwards. So the Bab said that the only purpose that he came was to announce to the world of the coming of Baha'u'llah. So that's how these two religions are connected. They are separate, but they are also connected. And Baha'is accept the Bab and Baha'u'llah as twin manifestations and, twin prophet founders of the Baha'i faith. The Bab said that, letters of the living, 18 people on their own accord should, find him and come to him before he would announce his mission to the world. So one of those was actually a person from India, from modern day Multan, a person named Shaikh Syed Hindi. So he, recognized the Bab before the Bab made himself known to him, and he's considered one of the letters of the living, the earliest followers of the Bab. And he was a student of Sayyid Kazim, for those of you who know Babi history, and he did eventually meet the Bab after 1844, and the Bab sent him back to the Indian subcontinent to tell the story of his religion and the coming of a promised one to Indians. Then Baha'u'llah also, sent his disciple, particularly a person named Jamal Effendi, who went to India in 1875 and was the earliest, teacher to bring the message of Baha'u'llah to India. And there's a thriving Baha'i community there, close to 1 million people, at this time. So around the world, we are around 7 million Baha'is, and about 1 million of them live, in India. And the most visible sort of symbol of the Baha'i faith in India is the Baha'i temple, the Lotus Temple, which built like the other Baha'i houses of worship with 9 sides, and people, come to it from all different religious traditions. When I lived in Delhi, I used to go regularly. My sister served there, so I had an intimate connection to the temple. Something that I remember, there were only 2 places in India where there was an interfaith religious, a prayer gathering every day. One was the spot where Gandhi was assassinated, was killed. It's called Gandhi Smriti, and the other was the Lotus Temple. The Gandhi Smriti had once a day interfaith prayer service, and the Lotus Temple, the Baha'i House of Worship, had 5 times a day, or sometimes 6, had interfaith prayer service. And it was a beautiful welcome symbol. The city of Delhi often uses this as its own, own symbol. I also remember once when I was, guiding there, some tourists from Israel came and they said, "Your Baha'i temple is nice, our Baha'i gardens are better." They were Israelis, and they had gone to Haifa, and they had seen their, Haifa terraces, which of course the city of Haifa owns as its own, and takes great joy. And similarly, many people in India think of this as a universal symbol. The lotus, of course, symbolizes, it's something that is common in Indian tradition and architecture, but it also symbolizes a pure, beautiful, glorious flower that comes from dirt, often seen growing in dirty ponds. So it's a symbol for life. So I will stop there. Sorry, this went a little bit longer than I thought it was going to, but I hope the story made sense. And for the next half hour, we'll take your questions and stories, questions and comments. And anyone who's here who actually has anything to add, please feel free to add as well. It doesn't only have to be questions.
Well, I just want to thank you before we move on to the question answer part. Thank you so much, Vasu, for your wonderful talk. I personally loved it. I learned about all the different religions, just beautiful culture. India, just beautiful culture. Thank you for sharing it. So now, if anyone has any questions, like Vasu said, you can either unmute yourself and ask the question or write it in the chat. And he will get to it. And there is a question. I mean, I see that there are comments and questions. The first question is, there are many Hindu temples left remaining in many Southeast Asian countries. Hinduism must have existed in these places before. How vast was Hindu empire in the ancient past?
The answer to that question is two parts. One is definitely Hinduism spread, but it was not one Hindu empire. The Southeast Asian empires were Southeast Asian empires. They just happened to have Hinduism as their religion. They were not politically connected to the empires in India. They were culturally connected. So Thailand, Cambodia, so the Cambodia Empire and many Indonesian empires. So they were quite vast, with hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions, and they lasted many centuries as well. They started out first as Hindu empires, then they became Buddhist empires. Some of them remained Buddhist empires, like the sort of the Cambodian case and the Thai case. They remained Buddhist empires, and some then moved on to become Muslim empires. Like the vast majority of Indonesian Hindu empires, converted to Islam, except for the island of Bali, which still remains completely as a Hindu enclave in Indonesia, adding great diversity to Indonesia. So it was not one empire; it was many empires, and the ones in Southeast Asia were native to Southeast Asia. They were not politically aligned with the ones in India.
Thank you. I see another question. It says, how was India called or organized before it became a country?
Very good question. So as I've said, literally, there are so many empires that existed in India, and these empires were their own empires. So the word India is a really interesting thing to think about. When I told the early Muslim, the Umayyad Caliphate, this is sort of early descendants of the prophets, the Umayyad Caliphates, when they came to conquer India, they, as they were going and conquering different countries, they stopped at the river Indus. The river Indus is a vast river that was running at the time. It's currently in modern-day Pakistan. They stopped at the river Indus, and that river was called Sindhu. And anyone who lived on the other side of the river were called Hindus, or the land was called Hind, and the people were called Hindi or Hindu. This is a little bit just to make sure that it's not confusing. Hindu today is a religion. Hindi is a language that is spoken in India. Not all Hindus speak Hindi, and not all Hindi speakers are Hindu either. Two distinct things. Hindu is a religion, Hindi is a language. But Hind in Arabic and Persian still refer to the land that is India, not just Hindu religion followers. Or so very often people, will ask, are you Hindi? So when I, the correct word sort of is Hindustani, is what he says. Hindustani is a person from Hindustan, but that's a more recent version. In the olden days, it's just called Hind. Anything on the other side of Indus River was called Hind. So even the name Hindu religion doesn't come until Islam and Hinduism actually meet. Before that, it was called the ancient religion, or Sanatana Dharma. It didn't even have this name, Hinduism. It's a really interesting idea. Similarly, the concept of India, the word India and the concept of India as a nation does not come until the British. Before that, the name for that ancient land was Bharat, Bharatvarsha. And independent India, as just sort of a rejection of colonization, took the Bharat as, so in when you see in India's, sort of in Hindi, India is not called India, it's called Bharat. So Bharat was the old name of that Indian subcontinent. India was a modern name, was given by British. So before the British, India did not exist as one country. It existed as many kingdoms, which fought with each other, which coexisted with each other. But there were many kingdoms spread throughout, and have spread. So the largest of those kingdoms were during the Empire Ashoka, Emperor Ashoka, 2,500 years ago. During the Mughal Empire, it was a very large parts of that subcontinent used to be India, used to be one Mughal empire. And then during the British is when the country as India became, so it consisted of Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, and parts of Burma. That whole thing was called, India by the British for their own colonial administration. And when they left, India was partitioned to Pakistan and India, and then later, Bangladesh became its own country. East Pakistan became Bangladesh. So before the British, there were so many so many kingdoms and principalities in India.
Thank you, Vasu. Now, Peter wants to know how you became a Baha'i.
So I was raised in Sri Lanka and then India, and I had run into, and I had the good fortune of growing up in a very multiracial, multicultural, multi-religious societies. I went to Catholic school, very devoutly went to catechism, learned about the Bible, like a lot of Sri Lankans do. I see Suranji, smiling. Went, just very much a product of Catholic school. When I was young, learned about the Bible, developed a deep relationship with, just the suffering of Christ, but also Santa Claus and Christmas and all those wonderful things associated with Christianity. I lived in a Buddhist country, a Buddhist majority country, and lived as a minority Hindu in that country. And due to the civil war, which is really directed against a minority Tamil community, went to India as a refugee, and then later lived and studied there for a while in India. And there, I was part of the majority community. So I was in a state called Tamil Nadu or Madras, where the majority language was what I spoke, unlike in Sri Lanka, where I was a minority. So had the unique sort of ability to live as a majority and a minority person, and really always saw good and bad in all these followers of these religions. So when I came to the US in the University of Florida, I, came to study and ran into Baha'is on campus. And during a range of incidents, really was prepared to think about, religion differently. And in the Baha'i faith, saw an explanation or a continuity of why is that religious diversity and how are they unified? Even where is the religious unity, both the diversity and unity? And the Baha'i faith really gave me a framework of what we call progressive revelation, religion that comes, like successive chapters of a book. Each religion builds on the one that comes before it, and prophesizes the one that comes after it. That spoke to me, really this diversity that I had seen, and then to really investigate the writings of the founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, and in his writing, hearing the same voice that I had heard in catechism class, at home in Hindu religious upbringing, and then in Sri Lanka on television all the time, Buddhist stuff, and watching that around me, really hearing that same voice repeat in the Baha'i writings, just felt that this was, I found a home. Felt it rang true to me. So that's how I became a Baha'i. A much longer story, but I'll, I think this is sufficient. There is one interesting question: are Muslims persecuted in India or treated poorly? This is a really complex question, and one that, are some, and very carefully asked. So thank you, Pama. Are some Muslims persecuted in India? The answer to that is yes. If you think about Indian Muslims, it's not exactly similar, but if you think about black and brown people here in the U.S. and what we face on a day-to-day basis, constantly needing to prove that we are part of this society, that we are not the others, and that we are loyal to this country that we call home. It's our loyalty is questioned all the time, our integrity is questioned a lot. So Muslims, because of the partition, and because of the intense divide and rule policy that the British did, there was this, there is a lot of historic suspicion and, between those communities that has been politicized, and really a lot, is now sort of is on steroids, at the anti-Muslim sentiment. There's also a lot of people who are still pushing back and, wanting a secular India, as the Indian constitution, calls for a secular nation. So this, so definitely yes. So I would say the answer is a yes, that there is anti-Muslim sentiment growing, and anti-minority sentiment. Some Christians who are being persecuted, as well. And I think there's also a strong, sort of movement pushing back and trying to reclaim this tolerant, beautiful, accepting, Hindu culture that has clearly welcomed all of these religions to its shores over the years, the Zoroastrians, the Jews, the Christians. So that's definitely a conversation that is happening in India. Hong has a question. It seems I want to ask the question carefully, not to offend anybody. All right, nobody get offended, please. When I was in Indonesia, I noticed that the religion is Muslim, but the culture and dances are Indian based. Did I misunderstand? No, you did not. And there's absolutely nothing to misunderstand. That is what is beautiful about Indonesia, is their own syncretic society, where so many traditions and cultures, have stayed in Java, not only Java, Sumatra, across these Indonesian empires, the languages. What is interesting, when you go to the Indonesian embassy here in DC, there's a big statue of a Hindu goddess Saraswati outside the Indonesian embassy. And Indonesia's national airline is called Garuda, and Garuda is the mythical god, mythical eagle of Hindu mythology, on which God Vishnu travels. So it's very much part of Indonesian culture. Like any other society, there are also people who are purists, and in Indonesia, who say that that syncretic culture is of their past and that should be separated. But there are also so many ways in which it's deeply intertwined into Indonesian society, the culture. You see some of their marriage ceremonies, you see the dances, and it's so evident that it is from a mix of Indian and particularly Hindu culture in Indonesia.
I just want to remind everyone that if you want, you can also unmute yourself and ask the question yourself. But there is a question there.
Several questions, actually. Let's be very quick with them. What is the Baha'i understanding of the many gods in Hinduism? I don't know that there is a Baha'i understanding, but I can share my understanding, which is to study my own studying of religion, these two religions, and knowing the truth in both of them. The Hindu religion, the origins of the Hindu religion, very clearly say God can be named as many, but they're all one God. So Indram, Mitram, Varunam, Vayu, Ekam, Divam, Sadvipara, Bahudavadanti. So there's this verse in Sanskrit that says, call him Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Vayu. One God is named, is known and worshipped as many. So that's the root of Hinduism. The other way to understand these many gods, because they are also part of mythology, they are separate in their own, they have their stories, is each god has a particular aspect. Like, for example, in the Baha'i faith, we use things like God is all-knowing, God as a remover of obstacles. If you look at Hindu gods, each of those gods has that. So it's really giving a personification for an attribute of God. Saraswati, as I said earlier, outside the Indonesian embassy, she's the goddess of knowledge. So she's the goddess of art and knowledge. Ganesha, the elephant-headed god, he is the god of the remover of obstacles. Shiva is a god who's a destroyer. Brahma is a god who is the creator. So it's like you take an aspect of God and you give it human form, diverse, chaotic, colorful, beautiful human form. That is sort of what what all of these Hindu gods represent. On one level, they are separate. There's father, mother, they are married, they have children. So there's a very clear, there's a hierarchy, there's stories, there are different names, different festivals, different temples. So that's one level of understanding those gods. But at a deeper level, everyone goes, even the Indian languages, when people speak South Asian languages, they have words that just refer to God as God. I mean, they may be talking about any one of these deities, but they are talking about God. So as a single concept. So I think these coexist. The pressure to have monotheism has really not been a big part of Indian society. And maybe that is why there was this inbuilt tolerance and pluralism. Very interesting. Hindus have the story of the 10 incarnations of God, which is its own talk at another time. They're called Dashavatara. And in some Hindu traditions, Buddha is considered one of those incarnations. So Buddhists generally don't accept, Buddhists may go to pray to Hindu gods as deities, but don't necessarily accept this 10 incarnation story. But for Hindus, Buddha is assimilated into that 10th. He's the 9th incarnation. Buddha, Asha, one of our dance teachers on this call, her students are learning Dasavatara, the 10 incarnations. And one of those incarnations is Buddha in that song, and they will learn and talk about Buddha. Buddhists, of course, will say this is an independent religion, which is completely true. But Hinduism, accepts that. And similarly, in that 10 incarnations is the promise of the 10th one, the Kalki avatar. Pong in a comment had written that the Buddha to come is the Buddha Maitreya. And, Baha'is from a Buddhist background consider Baha'u'llah to be that Buddha Maitreya. That's how, Baha'is connect their, Baha'is from a Buddhist origin connect their Buddhist religion and the Baha'i faith. And Baha'is from a Hindu origin, like me, the Kalki avatar, the promised, one who inaugurates a new era, we believe to be Baha'u'llah. That is our connection. For those of us who come from a Hindu background, believe that the founder of the great religion, is that return. And this idea that each religion has a return of their founder prophesies is very much in those religious texts. In Christianity, it's the second coming. So other Baha'is here of Christian background can speak to this clearly, but Baha'is of Christian background believe that the second coming of Jesus, that promise is fulfilled in the person of Baha'u'llah. So that's the connection between the Baha'i faith and Hindu religion, Buddhist religion, and Baha'u'llah.
Are you going to read the question? Or?
No, if you see one, you read one. I'm also now, I can see chat, so I'm also just looking. Please read if you have any questions.
Well, what has been the influence of Hollywood to Indian culture? It seems that due to those movies, a lot of that culture has been shared around the world. My parents used to watch dubbed Indian movies in Iran in the 80s, in the 50s and 60s.
On a very basic level, I'm very grateful for the influence of Bollywood, because you go anywhere, you have friends and you have something to talk about, and people yell out. I remember going to Egypt, and I was just completely stunned when people will, random people trying to sell you things will call movie star names to you, and you're kind of like, what? It's literally like if an American walking down the street, someone calls you Michael Jackson or Brad Pitt or whatever. So these movies are popular and they are interesting. It's the same answer if I ask what is the influence of Hollywood in American culture. It's both good and bad, right? On the one hand, it tells the story, but on the other hand, it reduces these stories to sort of very superficial characters, and reinforcing stereotypes, often promoting violence in many ways as a way to solve problems. If some people come together and collaboratively solve a problem, they may make a documentary about it. They very rarely make, Bollywood hits. Bollywood hits, you usually have to blow things up to make a movie, right? So it reinforces stereotypes. So Hollywood and Bollywood are very similar, in that. So it has a good influence that, it's a great brand ambassador, one that I think needs to be even more used, in India's soft power. It's one of the few things India has going for soft power right now. If you take away, yoga, obviously is another big thing that, so Bollywood is a soft power for India. But I also think it has particularly with issues relating to violence, with relating to gender roles, and how women are portrayed in. So it's really important. It's really important to be thoughtful about Bollywood. That said, there are some amazing films that come out of India as well. They're not as popular. They don't rake in the money, but some really beautiful films that come from that part of the world.
Okay, the next question is, I have heard that there are similarities between Hindu gods and Greek gods. Do you see that also? I remember the ritual I saw in Varanasi.
Yeah.
Remind me of Greek rituals.
Yes, there are very many similarities between, Hindu gods and Greek gods. And part of the reason, I don't think it's because there was intermingling necessarily. Part of the reason is Greek gods too, they took nature, they took certain aspects and gave them human form. It seems to be what traditionally different cultures did. So the same thing was happening in the Indian subcontinent as well. So if you had a god of war, for example, Mars, right, was a god of war, we have a very similar god in India, a god of war, very similar characteristics to Mars. So there are that kind of similarities, across Greek, Roman gods. There's also Japanese, pre-Buddhist Japanese deities. There are lots of connections. Very interestingly, my grandfather, about 60 years ago, wrote a book on this, the similarities of Hindu gods to gods from Greece, Rome, Japan, and the Nordic deities. So there's a great observation, Pong. There's a lot of similarities across cultures for this, because they took things that struck awe in them, like nature, like thunder, lightning, great floods, the ocean, big mountains. These were all given, divine form in those cultures. One other question I'm seeing, Armin, from before, from Asha. It says, how and when did Baha'i religion get assimilated in India? So I think I said this story, 1844, 1875 are two sort of points to, to note. Also in 1882, one of the first, in fact, it may be the first press of our Baha'i literature was established in India, called the Nasiri Press. And one of the first books, one of the central books in the in sort of the Baha'i scriptures, called the Book of Certitude, the Kitab-e-Igan, was published in India in 1882, as was a book written by the son of the founder of the Baha'i faith, Abdul Baha. The book called Secret of Divine Civilization was also published first in Bombay. So there was it started in Bombay, in that area. The earliest people to embrace the Baha'i faith were either of Muslim origin or Zoroastrian origin. And then later in the 1900s, and particularly 1960s, 70s, the Baha'i faith spread throughout India, particularly in the central part of India. And there was another short question about how are Baha'is contributing to Indian. What reception is the Baha'i faith having in India? This came to me as a direct message, it seems. What influence is the Baha'i faith having in India? The Baha'is, wherever they are trying to apply spiritual principles, their teachings, to the betterment of the societies that they live in. So Baha'is in India are, doing exactly the same thing, trying to address gender equality, environmental issues, the equality of women and men, communal harmony. So Baha'is are very active in addressing, these issues of their society. So as a community, as a small community, and a community that focuses its efforts on social development and the welfare of their societies, they have a disproportionate visibility and a disproportionate sort of what you say, you punch above your weight. So Baha'is are very well known to the government, in the civil society arena. They convene a lot of civil society working groups and work in Delhi. They're a small community, and very honestly and humbly share what they are learning through their own community building practices, through offering their learnings and their understanding to discourse in society, and also run many socioeconomic development projects like schools across India, but also there's a fantastic institute that trains tribal and rural women in a whole range of empowerment initiatives, including solar cooking, so that when they go back to their communities, they become ambassadors for good health and for clean cooking. And and there's a lot of projects that look at development of women. So the Baha'is are doing a lot of activities, often in collaboration with their with the friends and like-minded people, which is very similar. If you ask what a Baha'i is doing in Washington, D.C., I'd probably give you the exact same answer, right? So this is exactly what the Baha'is are doing everywhere. So that pattern is very, very similar. They establish spiritual, study circles. They establish interfaith devotional gatherings at the Baha'i centers and homes. They work to empower and support junior youth, young people, and do active actions of service. So that pattern is very similar in India. The only difference is it's a very large country and there are a lot of Baha'is. So there may be a lot more activities. I don't have any data that I'm basing this on. It's just a much larger community. the temple in Chicago, in the Baha'i House of Worship, called the Mother Temple of the Baha'i community in North America, very much stands at that kind of visual symbol. And the Baha'i Temple in New Delhi stands as a visible symbol for the Baha'i community. Would you consider talking about Hindu mythology in a future talk? Sure, I'd love to. If Armin invites me, I will do that. At another point in time, we'll talk about Hindu mythology, a discussion about the Bhagavad Gita. Yeah, we can talk about that. Certainly. One of the interesting things, and probably a little bit of a misconception, is that the Bhagavad Gita is a holy book for all Hindus, which it is not. It is not the equivalent of the Bible or the Quran, or one of these founding central, holy books. It is a very popular holy book, and many people turn to it for guidance. But by no means is it a holy book that is shared by all Hindus. In fact, there isn't anything that is compulsory for someone to be a Hindu, call oneself a Hindu, and that's it. There really isn't a official set of beliefs. In fact, Hinduism is one of the few religions that I know of that actually also accepts not believing, religion or God, and still you can call yourself, a Hindu. So I think it's a good thing to talk about at another point. Some people just consider it purely mythology. Sort of, it's mythology, and it's a good, how to live your life well kind of book that's in mythology. But it is a holy book, and it is a book that has a lot of central good teachings on how to be a good human being, particularly relevant to times when we have to make tough choices between right and wrong, and providing that moral guidance. Not one, it's not the equivalent of the Bible or the Quran, but it is a very holy book for many Hindus, but not all. I hope the presentation didn't go on for too long. I'm sorry. I tried to reduce the story, but it's a very large topic. So
Well, thank you. It was very informative. I learned a lot. I did not know most of the stuff. So thank you again. And if there are no questions,
I've got one more. How do the Baha'is handle the caste system in India?
very good question. Baha'is believe in the oneness of humanity and completely do not accept any division that puts anybody above anybody else. So categorically reject the notion of caste in principle. And when people become Baha'is, they obviously do bring that caste consciousness with them. So then it becomes a lifelong process of recognizing and getting rid of it in ourselves, but also then, actively trying to combat where caste prejudice exists in society. So it's both. And caste, like the race issue here in the United States, is, it's deeply pervasive. It is often very subconscious, and it's a sense of superiority that exists in people. It's daily active work, but caste also, is cultural. So there are aspects of caste that are cultural aspects that families have carried, with them for centuries. So then Baha'is will have to really think about what are some aspects of caste that they've inherited that are just cultural diversity, that is not, reinforcing superiority that they may follow, and what are aspects that are that actually reinforce a hierarchy and therefore need to be challenged and to be actively discarded. So it's a lifelong challenge. But this idea of caste or membership of a caste is something that Baha'is will strongly reject, and wherever possible in Baha'i communities where there are places where people eat together, you will not see caste-based differences. Sit together, there's no caste-based segregation. Baha'i community meetings. At the Baha'i temple, everyone is welcome. In fact, there are, in a lot of Hindu temples, certain people from certain castes are not allowed. Women during periods are not allowed inside temples. People from certain different religious communities are not allowed. The Baha'i temple stands really as a model that it's open symbolically, and also sends the message that everybody is equal. Everyone comes in, everyone, and we are all one. You know, so it's that said, that is the principle, but it is a lifelong process for Baha'is who come to the faith, you know, bringing with them, you know, this baggage, and they have to actively think about what do you discard and what do you not. Probably same as, you know, people becoming Baha'is from any culture, but certainly for caste, because it is so pernicious, it is so very, very deeply destructive to society. It's something that Baha'is will pay extra.
Thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions, thank you, Vasu, again. And please come to our next talk. We will put the announcement out and look forward to seeing everyone. Thank you and good night.
Thank you,
Okay.
Vasu. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vasu.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Vasu. It was wonderful.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and listening.
Thank you very
patiently.
much. Thank you.
Lots more to talk about.
Yes. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.